I never considered myself much of a drinker. Sure, I went out with my friends, tagged along to college bars, and sipped on a beer here and there, but I was always the dad of the group. The one who made sure no one got lost, no one got too wasted, and, most importantly, no one got into trouble. That's why, when I first met Alex, I wasn't expecting anything more than a casual conversation. I wasn't looking for a one-night stand or even a date. I just liked meeting new people, talking, and watching the chaos of the bar scene unfold. That night, we had pre-gamed at my friend Q's apartment before heading downtown. The bar was packed, pulsing with music, flashing lights, and the familiar scent of sweat and spilled alcohol. My friends, as expected, scattered in different directions, eager to test their luck with the girls who filled the club. I found my way to the bar, where I ended up talking to some dude in a cowboy hat about the best whiskey brands, something I knew absolutely nothing about. And that's when she approached me. Alex was stunning, but not in an over-the-top, intimidating way. She had this effortless beauty, dirty blonde hair that curled at the ends, light brown eyes that almost shimmered gold under the dim bar lights. She had this relaxed, confident smile that made you feel like you'd known her forever. "Mind if I buy you a drink?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I chuckled. "Isn't it supposed to be the other way around?" She shrugged, that same warm smile never leaving her lips. "Consider it a trade. I buy you a drink, and you be my friend for the night." It was an odd offer, but not a bad one. I nodded. "Deal." We fell into easy conversation. She didn't seem like the typical party girl. She wasn't loud or overly flirty. She asked me about myself, actually listened when I spoke, and laughed at my dumb jokes. It felt different, refreshing, even. But then things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. She moved a little closer. Her hand brushed against mine. Her gaze held just a second too long. And then, finally, she asked, "Want to get out of here?" I hesitated. I usually don't do that kind of thing." For the briefest moment, something flickered in her expression, something cold, almost calculating. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She pouted playfully. "Not even to watch a movie?" No pressure. I wasn't sure why, but my gut told me something was off. Maybe it was the way she'd appeared out of nowhere. Maybe it was the way she kept steering the conversation back to me, learning everything she could while revealing almost nothing about herself. Or maybe it was just the fact that, for all her friendliness, there was something too perfect about it all. Still, against my better judgment, I agreed. I pulled out my phone to call an Uber, but before I could even open the app, she grabbed my wrist, firm but gentle. "No need," she said. I drove. That's when the alarm bells really started ringing. "You said you came alone," I pointed out. She hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second. "Yeah," she said smoothly. I parked right outside. I followed her through the crowd, my head buzzing not just from the alcohol but from the creeping sense of unease settling in my stomach. We stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my skin like a wake-up call. That's when I saw it. A black Honda Civic, parked directly in front of the club. I stopped in my tracks. "This is a pickup lane," I said, frowning. "So," she replied, tugging at my wrist. "So, if you drove here alone, why were you parked in a spot reserved for drop-offs?" She let out a soft laugh, but there was tension in it now. "Come on, don't be paranoid." That's when I saw them. 3 figures sitting inside the car. They weren't moving, just waiting, watching. My pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't a drunk girl trying to hook up. This was something else. Something calculated. I yanked my wrist free and took a step back. "You know what? I think I'm just gonna call it a night." Her expression hardened. "Oh, come on. I really wanted to spend some time with you." There was something eerie about the way she said it. Like it wasn't a request, it was an expectation. A demand. And then, as if realizing she was losing me, she took a different approach. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something soft and sultry. "We can do whatever you want," she murmured. "Anything. No strings attached." My stomach twisted. I looked past her, at the car. The figures inside. One of them was shifting now, his head turning toward us, his eyes catching the glow of a passing streetlight. I turned on my heel and started walking back toward the club. That's when she snapped. "You're ing loser," she shrieked, loud enough that heads turned. "I wasn't even into you. You're pathetic." I ignored her, pushing past the bouncer and back into the safety of the club. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short gasps. I texted my friends, told them everything, and we left together. But even as we rode home in the Uber, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. The next morning, my head clearer, I called the city's anonymous tip line. I told them everything, the car, the girl, the 3 men inside. I never found out what happened after that. If they were caught. If they found another target. But I do know one thing. Had I been just a little drunker, just a little less aware, just a little more trusting, I might not have been the one telling this story. I was 13 the first time I ever went to a bar. I know how that sounds. What kind of kid hangs out in bars at 13? But it wasn't like that. It was Comic-Con weekend, and I was visiting the capital with my grandparents. Back then, I was a total nerd, obsessed with anime, video games, and all things sci-fi. I'd been counting down the days until Comic-Con, my first ever convention, where I'd finally get to meet some of my online friends in person. That's where it all started. I've been talking to a group of older friends online for about a year. They were all around 17 to 19, just a few years older, but at that age, the difference felt huge. They were cooler, more experienced, and in my 13-year-old mind, they were practically adults. When they invited me to hang out after the con, I was thrilled. And when they said we'd be meeting at a bar near my hotel, I barely thought twice. I'll ask my grandparents to come, I'd said in our chat, just so they know I'm safe. One of them, Jake, I think, had responded, "Yeah, good idea. We don't want you getting in trouble." I was too excited to notice the weirdness in his wording. The bar was just a short walk from our hotel. When we got there, my grandparents, being the protective type, sat at a nearby table where they could keep an eye on me. I was fine with it. After all, I wasn't there to drink. I just wanted to talk with my friends, to feel older, to feel included. At first, it was exactly what I expected. The bar was loud, filled with the chatter of convention goers still buzzing from the event. My friends were great in person, laughing and joking, making me feel like I belonged. But then, I noticed him. He was sitting on the same long bench as me, just a few seats down. An older man, probably in his 40s, wearing a worn-out hoodie and jeans. Nothing about him screamed dangerous, but something about his presence made me uneasy. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But every time I glanced over, he was closer. One seat closer, then another, and another. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just moving to get a better view of the TV playing in the background. Maybe he was looking for an open table. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But when I looked again, this time, really looked, I realized he wasn't watching the TV. He was watching me. Not just watching, staring. A slow, deliberate stare, the kind that makes your skin crawl. His eyes never wavered, never darted away in embarrassment when I caught him. Instead, they stayed locked on me, unwavering, unblinking. My stomach twisted. I turned back to my friends, trying to focus on the conversation, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of his gaze drilling into me. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, he moved again. This time, not just a seat closer. This time, he was right next to me. I felt his arm brush against mine. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt of panic through me. I scooted forward slightly, trying to create space between us, but the bench was against a wall. I had nowhere to go. My heart pounded. I could feel sweat forming at the back of my neck. Why was he so close? Why wasn't he saying anything? And then, I felt it. A shift in movement. The subtle change of weight on the bench. His hand, slowly, inching under the table. Reaching toward me. A sickening wave of realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I was frozen, my body paralyzed between fight and flight. I wanted to move, to scream, to do anything, but my mind was spinning, my breath caught in my throat. Then, out of nowhere, "Come on, sweetheart. We're leaving." My grandmother's voice, sharp and urgent, sliced through the moment like a knife. She was standing beside me, her face unreadable, but her grip on my shoulder was firm. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled up, barely mumbling a goodbye to my friends, and followed my grandparents out of the bar. We walked in silence. Not a word spoken until we reached the hotel. And then, finally, my grandmother turned to me, her expression dark with something I had never seen on her face before. "He was touching himself," she said quietly. I felt my stomach drop. I shook my head. "What?" She swallowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That man, he was rubbing himself, under the table, while watching you." My entire body went cold. I tried to process it, tried to piece together the fragments of the night. The staring, the way he kept moving closer. The way I had felt something shift beneath the table, his hand reaching. I gagged. My grandfather placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "That's why we left," he said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "That's why we didn't make a scene. We just needed to get you out." I nodded, feeling like I might throw up. The realization hit me hard. If my grandmother hadn't been watching, if she hadn't pulled me away in time. I shuddered. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The way he had watched me like I was prey. I never saw my online friends in person again. I stopped chatting with them, stopped logging into the group. Something about the way Jake had phrased it before, "We don't want you getting in trouble," lingered in my mind. Had they known? Had they seen him before? Had they noticed and just not said anything? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. What I did know was this: I would never step foot in a bar again. Not without looking over my shoulder. Not without wondering who was watching. And I would never, ever ignore a gut feeling again. My grandmother always told me to be careful when going out. She wasn't a strict woman, nor was she paranoid. But there was a hardness in her eyes when she gave that warning, something that suggested she had lived through something that made her believe the world wasn't as safe as we like to think. I didn't understand why, not at first. Then, one day when I was a teenager, she sat me down and told me a story about a night that could have been her last. It was the late 1960s, maybe early 70s. My grandmother, Mary, was a young woman then, small, barely 5 feet tall, the kind of person my dad and his brothers used to joke could fit in their pockets. She wasn't a heavy drinker, but she enjoyed a night out every now and then, and back then, bars weren't just places to get drunk. They were social spots, places to meet people, unwind, and escape from the daily grind. That particular night, she had gone out alone. It wasn't unusual at the time. Things were different then. People trusted each other more. Or maybe they just hadn't yet learned how much darkness could hide behind a stranger's smile. She didn't remember much about the beginning of the night. She had been having fun, chatting with a few people she met, drinking just enough to feel warm, but not enough to be drunk. Then, she went to the bathroom. She left her drink on the bar. She was only gone a few minutes. When she came back, the glass was exactly where she had left it, the amber liquid inside untouched. Or so it seemed. She took a sip, and nothing tasted different. Nothing seemed wrong. Not at first. But then, something started to change. It was subtle at first, a slight fuzziness in her vision, a warmth that wasn't from the alcohol. Her fingers tingled. Her body felt lighter, almost detached, as if she were watching herself from a distance. She blinked, shook her head, tried to clear the haze. But it only got worse. Her limbs felt heavy. Her thoughts slowed, as if they were wading through molasses. She tried to push herself up from the bar, but her legs didn't cooperate. That's when she knew something was very, very wrong. Panic set in, but it was a dull, distant thing. Like her brain was trying to send alarms, but they were muffled, buried under layers of cotton. Somewhere in the fog, she remembered reading something. Something about how certain drugs worked, how they didn't knock you out right away, but made you compliant, made you easy to manipulate. And suddenly, she wasn't just scared, she was terrified. She didn't know who did it. She didn't see anyone suspicious. But someone had drugged her, and they were still there, watching, waiting. Somewhere deep inside her clouded mind, she realized she needed to act fast. She needed to get away before whoever did this decided it was time to make their move. She pushed herself off the bar stool, forcing her legs to move, to carry her away. She stumbled, nearly fell, but caught herself. The bathroom. She needed to get to the bathroom. She forced herself forward, step by agonizing step, her heart slamming against her ribs. When she finally reached the door, she shoved it open and stumbled inside. She locked the stall, and then, her body gave out. Her limbs refused to move. She collapsed against the wall, her breath shallow, her vision swimming in and out of focus. She wasn't sure how long she was in there. Minutes? Hours? She heard voices outside. The sounds of the bar continued as if nothing had happened, as if she weren't crumpled in a bathroom stall, barely able to keep her eyes open. At some point, she heard footsteps. Heavy, slow. Someone entered the bathroom. She held her breath, her body refusing to move, fear gripping her so tightly she thought her heart might stop. A shadow moved outside the stall door. Then, the knob rattled. Once, twice, Someone was trying to open the door. She tried to speak, to shout, but all that came out was a weak, slurred noise. The knob rattled again, harder this time. Then, silence. Whoever it was, they were just standing there, waiting. She forced her fingers to move, reaching up with trembling hands to press against the door, as if that thin piece of wood could keep her safe. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, the footsteps retreated. She heard the bathroom door swing open, and then she was alone again. She didn't know how long she stayed there, curled up in that stall, fighting to keep her eyes open, forcing herself to stay awake. But eventually, the haze began to lift. Her limbs were still weak, her body still sluggish, but she could move again, and she knew she needed to get out. With what little strength she had left, she pushed herself up, unlocked the stall, and staggered out of the bathroom. The bar was still full. People were still laughing, drinking, completely unaware of what had just happened. She forced herself toward the exit, keeping her head down, ignoring the way the world spun around her. Somehow, she made it home. She never found out who drugged her. She never told the police back then. It wasn't something people talked about. She never went to that bar again. But she never left her drink unattended after that night. And when she told me this story, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you ever go to a bar, never, ever leave your drink alone." I thought about her words every time I went out. I thought about them when I watched my friends get careless, when I saw strangers offering drinks with too eager smiles. I used to think she was just being overprotective. Now, I know better. Because sometimes, the real horror isn't ghosts or monsters. Sometimes, the real horror is the person standing next to you, waiting for you to let your guard down. I was 19 when I got my first job at a bar. It wasn't anything fancy, just a local dive downtown, tucked between a row of old brick buildings. It wasn't the kind of place where college kids went to party. It catered more to the regulars, the kinds of guys who sat in the same seats every night, drinking the same whiskey and mumbling the same stories they'd told 100 times before. I liked it. It was small, simple. I got to know the customers, learned how to balance a tray full of drinks without spilling, and picked up on which bartenders gave heavier pours when they were in a good mood. But there was one thing I didn't like. Jason. Jason was a bouncer at the bar. He was big, easily over 6 feet tall, built more like a wall than a man. Not the muscle-bound, bodyguard kind of big, but the kind that suggested years of bad habits and an even worse diet. I never really spoke to him. He wasn't friendly. He wasn't talkative, but he was always watching. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. I'd feel eyes on me and glance up from the bar, only to see Jason standing by the door, staring. Not just looking, not just checking the crowd, but watching me. When I walked past him, I could feel his eyes follow me. When I laughed with coworkers, I'd glance over and see him staring, expression unreadable. And when our shifts ended, and I walked out into the night, I always had the feeling that he was standing there, just inside the bar, watching me go. It wasn't anything I could point to. He never spoke to me, never touched me, never did anything that I could complain about. But I knew he was waiting for something. I just didn't know what. Then, one night, I found out. It was a Friday, which meant a long shift, a crowded bar, and the promise of tips that would make the exhaustion worth it. By the time closing rolled around, I was dead on my feet, my hair sticking to my face from the heat behind the bar, my voice hoarse from shouting over the music. My manager, Mike, clapped me on the back. "How are you getting home?" I shrugged. "Walking. It's not far." Mike frowned. "At this time of night? Alone?" "I do it all the time," I said. "You shouldn't." Before I could argue, he waved Jason over. I stiffened. "Hey, Jason, you're giving Alyssa a ride home," Mike said. Jason nodded. No protest, no hesitation. Just a quiet sure. I wanted to refuse. My whole body screamed at me to refuse. But what was I supposed to say? "No, Mike, I think Jason is a creep even though he hasn't actually done anything wrong." So I nodded. Okay. I told myself I was being stupid, that I was being paranoid, that Jason was just a quiet guy, a little awkward, maybe, but harmless. But as we walked to his car, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my stomach. His car was old, beat up, the kind that rattled when the engine started. I slid into the passenger seat, and the moment he shut his door, I felt trapped. The drive was short, 10 minutes at most, but it felt longer. Jason didn't speak. He didn't turn on the radio. He just drove. When we pulled up to my dorm, I unbuckled my seatbelt so fast that the buckle nearly jammed. "Thanks for the ride," I muttered, reaching for the handle. "Alyssa," he said. I froze. He had never said my name before. I turned to look at him. He was staring, the way he always stared. Only this time, there was something different in his eyes. Something heavy. Something wrong. I swallowed hard. Yeah. His mouth twitched, almost like he wanted to smile, but couldn't quite figure out how. Then, he just said, "See you around." I nodded, shoved the door open, and practically ran inside. I didn't tell anyone about the ride. I didn't tell anyone about Jason. I should have, because that was only the beginning. A few months later, I quit the bar. I moved on, got a new job, forgot about Jason. Or at least, I tried to. Then, one day, I got a Facebook friend request. No profile picture. Just a name. Jason. I stared at it for a long time. I never told Jason my last name. I never added him on social media. I clicked decline and blocked the profile. A few weeks later, I checked my Instagram. New follower. Jason. Another blank profile. Another block. I told myself it was nothing. Just him being weird. Just a one-time thing. But it wasn't. Every few months, a new request. A new profile. Each time, I blocked him. Each time, he came back. And then, years later, I got a text. It was from an unknown number. "You're a beautiful person, Alyssa." Inside and out. I stared at the message, my heart hammering. "Sorry, but who is this?" I texted back. The reply came fast. "To be honest, it's Jason. From a decade ago." My skin went cold. I hadn't seen him in over 10 years. "How did you get my number?" No answer. Just another message. I read something online about a girl who was struggling. She said if it weren't for her babies, she wouldn't be here. I got upset. I wasn't going to text you, but I did anyway. If that was you, I want to help. I had no idea what he was talking about. I never posted anything like that. And then, "If you want me to go away, just tell me, and I'll never bother you again. I come in good faith." I blocked the number. And then I did something I should have done years ago. I looked him up. The first thing that popped up? A mugshot. I clicked the article. My stomach twisted. Jason had been arrested. For stalking. A child. It started when she was 11. He had been her school bus driver. He hacked into her teacher's email. Ordered her school pictures. He stalked her for years. Her family got protection orders. He ignored them. Until, finally, they caught him lurking on their property. They arrested him. But he didn't stay in jail for long. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I knew then, without a doubt, that Jason hadn't just been watching me all those years ago. He had been waiting. And now, after all this time, he had come back. I called the police. I filed a report. I got a protection order. I don't know if he's still watching, but sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I feel it. That same heavy stare. Like something is lurking just out of sight. Waiting. It started like any other night out. My best friend and I had just turned 21, and the bar scene was still new to us, something exciting, something that felt like a rite of passage into adulthood. We didn't have much money, so we weren't the kind of guys who bought rounds for everyone, and we definitely weren't used to girls buying drinks for us. That's why Candace stood out. I noticed her right away when we sat down at the bar. She had this fiery red hair, so bright it looked unnatural, almost like she had stepped out of a comic book. It cascaded down her shoulders, catching the dim bar lights like embers. She was beautiful, and she knew it. She slid up to us, her smile playful, her eyes sharp. "You two look like you could use a drink," she said, her voice smooth, confident. My friend, already a few drinks deep from the ride over, grinned. "You offering?" She laughed. "Maybe I just like making new friends." She ordered drinks for all three of us. At first, I thought she was just trying to get a free drink out of us, but she never once asked us to return the favor. If anything, she was the one keeping our glasses full. And I mean full. I wasn't a lightweight, but something about the way she kept refilling my glass made me feel off balance. Like she was testing me. Like she was waiting for something. Then my friend went to the bathroom and never came back. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was drunk. Maybe he'd gotten lost on his way back from the restroom, or maybe he'd bumped into someone he knew. But after 15 minutes, I started to worry. I pulled out my phone to text him, then realized my phone was missing. My stomach dropped. I always kept it in my pocket. Always. Candace tilted her head. watching me. Something wrong. My phone's gone, I muttered, patting my pockets again, as if that would somehow change the outcome. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's weird. The way she said it made my skin crawl. I shook it off and stood up. I'm gonna go check on my friend. Candace's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Her nails pressed into my skin, not hard, but firm. Relax, she said, her voice lower now, almost persuasive. I'm sure he's fine. Stay. Have another drink. I pulled my arm away. I need to find him. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in her eyes. The warmth, the playfulness, it was gone, replaced by something colder, calculating. I turned away from her, heading toward the bathrooms. My head was buzzing, and not just from the alcohol. Something felt wrong. I pushed open the door to the men's room. Empty. No sign of my friend. I checked my texts in case he'd somehow found my phone and messaged me. But no, the screen was still blank. I stepped out of the bathroom and scanned the bar. And that's when I saw it. Outside, past the bouncers, I caught a glimpse of him. My friend was slumped against the alley wall, a figure standing next to him. A man. Someone I didn't recognize. My breath hitched. I rushed toward the exit, pushing past the drunken crowd. But before I could reach him, the man grabbed my friend by the arm and led him toward a car parked just a few feet away. A black sedan. The same kind Candace had pointed to when she'd asked if I wanted to leave with her. My pulse pounded in my ears. I bolted forward. Hey, what the hell are you doing? The man looked up, startled. For a split second, he hesitated. Then he let go of my friend, shoved him toward the ground, and jumped into the car. Tires screeched. The car peeled away, disappearing into the night. I barely noticed. I was already crouching beside my friend, shaking him. He was barely conscious. Hey, wake up. My voice cracked with panic. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. What happened? I didn't know, but I had a sick feeling in my gut that Candace had something to do with it. I pulled out my phone, my missing phone, which was now back in my pocket, and called an Uber. I didn't know how it got there, and I didn't have time to question it. We just needed to get out of there. I didn't see Candace anywhere, but somehow I knew she was watching. The ride home was silent. My friend was groggy, barely able to keep his head up. Whatever had happened, it had drained him. The next morning, when he was a little more awake, I asked him what he remembered. Nothing, he admitted. I went to the bathroom, felt dizzy, then nothing. I nodded slowly. I didn't tell him about the car, about the man, about how close he had been to not coming home. I spent the next few days trying to find Candace online. She had given us her name, but when I searched, there was nothing. No social media, no records. It was like she didn't exist. A week later, I went back to the bar, not to drink, to ask questions. I showed the bartender a picture of my friend and me from that night. Do you remember her? I asked. The girl with the red hair? The bartender frowned, shaking his head. I don't think so. She was buying drinks. A lot of them. That made him pause. What did she look like again? I described her. Red hair, bright green eyes, confident smile. His frown deepened. That's funny, he muttered. We had a girl like that here a few months back. Same description. She was with some guys, real sketchy types. Some dude ended up in the alley, wallet gone. No memory of the night. I swallowed hard. What happened to them? I asked. The bartender shrugged. Dunno. They show up every few months. Always with a different girl. Always someone new. But the redhead? Yeah, she's always there. My stomach twisted. I don't know what would have happened if I had gotten in that car with her. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found my friend in time. But I do know one thing. Candace, if that was even her real name, was still out there. And somewhere, in some other bar, she was smiling at someone new. Filling their glass. Waiting for the right moment.